There are few things that have been marketed as aspirational items quite as ruthlessly as the hi-fi in all its incarnations. From the 1950s until the late 1980s, hi-fi systems, be they record decks, tape recorders, speakers, all-in-one units or separates, were seen as the ultimate consumer luxury and a sign of sophistication. At the peak of the lounge music era, a groovy music system was as much a part of the swinging bachelor pad as a cocktail cabinet. A selection of seductive, easy-listening sounds, played through a state-of-the-art setup, was a vital part of any modern hipster's home. It was very much an essential component in the Playboy lifestyle, and it's no surprise that some of the ads were specific to that magazine and its rivals. And of course, the easy listening LPs that you might play on your expensive new setup also had similar glamour girls and faux sophistication on the covers, perpetuating the fantasy. Back then, it was thought that most, if not all, the customers for such equipment would be men. No doubt there were exceptions even at the time, but on the whole, the sort of people who were fascinated by woofers and tweeters and would argue over whether a collection of separates would give a better sound than a ready-built hi-fi unit tended to be male, and not necessarily the sort who would be bringing home gorgeous models to sip martinis with while listening to Martin Denny's latest. Still, they could dream. Hi-fi manufacturers and their ad agencies knew how to sell that dream. And for most of their customers, the dream was about gorgeous girls who would be so impressed by their new Kenwood receiver that their clothes would immediately fall off. Of course, sex was used to sell everything back in the 1960s and 1970s, but the hi-fi world is remarkably blatant. There is, in fact, a fascinating subgenre of glamour modeling that we might call the hi-fi girl. Scantily clad women posing with vinyl LPs and record players in photos that seem to be the result of a primal understanding of what men were excited by. The glamour girl and hi-fi combo continued in advertising into the mid-1980s, and like much of this sort of advertising, it never quite went away, especially in countries where political correctness is still a novel idea. But changing tastes would see the models phased out. As time went on, the equipment itself was increasingly seen as the object of desire and didn't need a glamorous girl draped across it to sell. So, mix a martini, dust off your Julie London LPs, and settle in for a nostalgic look at a seductive hi-fi world of glamour and aspiration. And don't forget to comment, click the like button, subscribe, and tap the alert bell so that you never miss any of our posts.